Thank you for joining us for today's webinar in celebration of World Wildlife Day, where this year's theme focuses on medicinal and aromatic plants, conserving health, heritage, and livelihoods. Now, today's webinar is hosted by Shift Screen Africa and facilitated by the African Wildlife Economy Institute. My name is Lydia, and I'm a postgraduate student at AWA, and I'll be chairing our discussion over the next hour. A little bit about myself. Much of my work has been focused on wildlife, particularly wild animals and health systems. So engaging in this topic has been a great reminder that wildlife economies are not only about animals, but also deeply about plants. Now, an interesting fact I found out recently is that an estimated percentage of 10% of all tree species worldwide, nearly around 6,000 species, have been documented for medicinal and aromatic uses. And I found this quite extraordinary, particularly because plants are something that we don't always immediately associate with wild economies. So this is what makes today's webinar both timely and necessary, because we'll be taking a closer look into the opportunities and the responsibilities within Africa's growing wild plant economy. If you get to the screen in the first question, please type the name of one medicinal or aromatic plant that you know. You are also welcome to write it in your native language if that pleases you. Great. I see we have some names coming up there with frankincense in bold, as well as the biggest letter that's highlighted there. And it's also very interesting to see how these different names are emerging. Some are familiar species, and I think some might be locally specific. Now, I'm curious to know how the plant that you mentioned is primarily used in your context. So in the next question, Marith will take us to the next question. Please select how that plant that you mentioned is used in your context. You're welcome to choose more than one option if it applies. Great. So what's fascinating really is how these plants are being used, and it's spanning from traditional medicine. I see that's really one of the highest, to food systems, cosmetics, and social market. And that intersection between local knowledge, livelihoods, and value chain is exactly what today's discussion will explore. So it is my greatest pleasure to introduce our two speakers for today's webinar. Our first speaker is Miss Deborah Voorhees, who is the CEO of FairWild Foundation, a global body that is dedicated to enhancing sustainability and equity in the harvesting of wild plants. FairWild provides a third-party certification standard and risk assurance tools to enhance sustainability in wild harvested ingredient supply chains. Ms. Deborah, we welcome you. Now, and then our second speaker is Mr. Jacob Nibro. Sorry for that. Mr. Jacob Nibro works with AAK Kolo Nafaso program in Ghana, a large-scale share initiative that is involved with more than 200 women harvesters. With expertise in project management, strategic procurement, and sustainability, he brings a grounded perspective on how responsible sourcing works in practice. Mr. Jacob, we welcome you. Over to you, Mrs. Deborah.
I just want to say one thing before I start, and that is that for most of my career, I've worked on wildlife-related issues, either directly or indirectly. And I've worked with the UN, I've worked with World Bank, I've done some work for CITES, blah, 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 blah. But only in the last 5 years, since I have had the incredible privilege of working with FairWild, have I truly understood this thing about plants. Not just understood it intellectually, but inside myself, to understand that without plants, there would be no animals. Without plants, there would be no people. Without plants, there wouldn't be anything. And really to focus on what this means. And I think that this is the most absolutely fabulous occasion that this World Wildlife Day, we as a globe have come to realize the power of wild plants. So We at FairWild, and I'll just move on there a little bit, is we have this vision. We have this vision that understands the globe as this one integrated system that works to support itself, and that the use of wild plants, the sustainable harvesting of those wild plants, can have these three interconnected objectives and dimensions that work with each other. First, we understand that by harvesting wild plants sustainably, we're actually directly supporting conservation. We're looking at that plant and how the use of it sustainably supports that species. We're looking, how that plant interacts with the landscape, and how the use of that plant and the wild harvesting of that plant actually supports that landscape and helps to contribute to our global objective to preserve and conserve this planet. Secondly, it helps us to understand the people. Who are these people that do this wild harvesting? Who are they? They are not, as we typically see, they are not employees working on a farm. They are not other kinds of employees. They actually are people out there whose livelihoods as individuals depend upon that wild harvesting. They may, and very often are, members of marginalized constituencies and communities that are quite remote and are not well treated. And part of our objective, therefore, is to ensure that these people are treated with respect, that they have dignity, that they can have dignified livelihoods, that their communities can live and thrive because of that wild harvesting. The third element we look at is business. Now, it's very easy sometimes when we are in the wildlife community to say, oh, business is bad, etc. But actually, as we will see when we look through a few case studies here, business is what drives us. If there is not a demand for that frankincense, that marula, or whatever, if nobody is wanting to buy it, there will be no livelihood, there will be no equity, and quite frankly, that landscape could be transformed. It could be used by goats. It could be turned into a soy plantation or whatever. So ultimately, we need all these three dimensions to contribute to a world where nature, people, and business thrive together as one integrated whole. So this is what we as FairWild do. We provide a system by which you can know and understand how to do this right. And then we help organizations to certify that by assessing that and knowing that and being able to communicate to everybody they deal with, whether it is consumers or whether it is harvesters on the ground or players anywhere in the supply chain, that we know that this is contributing to this golden three-way objective. So, question is, how relevant is this really in the world? We have this wonderful idea, but is it really material? So what I'm going to do for the next 3 or 4 or 5 minutes is just run through a few examples of species where we can see these outcomes all too clearly. For example, there's baobab, and I love to look at baobab because baobab is this ancient symbol of life on our planet. Where else do you get a tree that doesn't even start fruiting for the first 100 years of its life? There are baobabs that are millennia old on our planet. It's found throughout Africa, because we are focusing on Africa today, and it is this wonderful cradle-to-grave product that actually so much of it can be used. The seeds can be used to make oils, which are used in sort of cosmetic purposes. The fruit pulp and seeds are used in nutrition. The leaves and the bark are used. It's really a multi-use product, which is absolutely fabulous. And we look at this. This is a market. This is a real market, folks. Because if we look at this increasing demand for baobab, and it is increasing, the market size in 2023 was estimated. Now, this is a big, diverse market. This isn't just the amount of baobab that gets shifted out. Was 2.2 billion estimated, and estimated to reach 10 billion in 2032. Now, let's think a little bit very briefly about the sustainability impacts of doing that harvesting. We're conserving the broader ecosystem and all the species that live in it. The bats, the pollinators, the elephants, the bush babies, all of those things. The fact that baobab stores moisture makes it climate resilient. We always say when we're at the African Baobab Alliance meetings, that the baobab tree is going to be the last tree standing, the last thing standing once the world gets fried through climate change, because it's so incredibly resilient. Baobab harvesting, however, supports women's empowerment. The women do the harvesting. The women, through proper FairWild certified sustainable harvesting, are able to earn these dignified livelihoods that are so important. And as a result, it stimulates local economies and provides livelihood opportunities throughout the value chain. So the baobab is one of those really emblematic things. But there are so many. Let's look at mostly the medicinal market, even something like devil's claw, which is not quite so prolific, but is found throughout the arid and semi-desert regions of Angola, Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa. Medicinal values, digestive issues, and as a dietary supplement. Again, we see a steady growth for that demand, driven by those medicinal properties. And rural communities we've got 10 to 15,000 harvesters. Now, in a place like Namibia, for example, that's really material, because these are not densely populated areas. We estimate that in 2024, the market is worth about 240 to 280 million. These are really quite wide guesses, by the way, because there's not a lot of very specific information out there. And we estimate that it could reach 450 million by 2025, even with a compound annual growth rate of about 6%. Then let's look at argan from the north of our continent. Well, found mostly in Algeria and Morocco, and please excuse the typo, used for the seeds and fruit pulp, widely used in cosmetics, culinary oils as well, though, and also medicinal properties. We're beginning to see some themes come out here of how wide the application, the uses of these products can be. Argan, of course, is really growing in demand, and already we thought that the market was around about 350 to 370 million in 2024 and double that by 2030. Again, we see this is Africa. Africa's dry. Sustainable harvesting helps to protect against desertification, prevents soil erosion, and of course provides that valuable habitat for the animal wildlife. Again, you see the issue of women's empowerment. It's women's cooperatives, a major driver, economic driver in Morocco. And therefore, the standard of living for those communities has been substantially enhanced. Now we look at my favorite. I can't talk too much about this because this is what Jacob's going to talk about. But this is a magic product, folks. It's found across from West Africa all the way to Eastern Africa, used widely in foods, cosmetics, skincare, and even medicinally. And shea, so easy to harvest sustainably. It falls to the ground. Could not be easier. And market trends, huge growth. We're talking about 2.5 billion estimated in 2025 and projected to reach 5 billion by 2034. These trees are also drought resistant, combat desertification, providing habitat. So these sustainable harvesting methods that we are seeing here with many of these sort of easily picked up fruit and so on are just critical. And again, dignified livelihoods for millions of women across the continent. Let's go back down south again and take a look at marula, which is also one of these ones that's only in the more recent years become more understood and commercialized as a product, but also very, very useful in a number of different ways. Anti-inflammatory properties in medicine, used in cosmetics and skincare. I love marula oil, by the way. Look for it everywhere for my hair. It's such a thing. And of course, increasingly lately, we're seeing in food and beverage products too. So again, we're seeing steady market growth, driven largely by cosmetics and personal care, I have to say. We're seeing this as a general trend now, that cosmetics and personal care I should say, are drivers for demand for natural products, sustainably harvested products. In 2024, the market was predicted to be about 60 million and expected to grow to about 100 million by 2034. Again, supporting biodiversity, help maintaining biodiversity in the landscape, and also it has a food security element to it as well. Again, income for rural communities otherwise might be suffering, and particularly women. Now, again, I say this is my favorite every product we look at, but it's just the way it is. But frankincense, truly, truly, I promise, is really, really special. Found throughout the Horn of Africa, Northeast Africa, Somalia, Ethiopia, Kenya, and of course up and over to Oman and places like that as well. This is a resin. So you cut the tree, the resin comes out, and it's cut off a few weeks later. Frankincense has been traded for thousands and thousands of years. It's been used in religious rituals and embalming going back, 5,000 years. Increasingly understood for its medicinal properties, anti-inflammatory, wound healing, respiratory health, and more aromatherapy, incense, cosmetics, and perfumes. Hardly a top-level perfume is out there that doesn't have frankincense in it. Now, I've just used frankincense here, but of course there's also myrrh, opoponax, and the other related kinds of things of that nature. But this is special, special stuff with great growth as well. Market trends growing, currently about 340 million, probably going to be worth around 700 million in the next 7 to 10 years. A lot of sort of scientific research going on about its medicinal properties and the therapeutic benefits, which is wonderful. And again, sustainability, drylands. Think of the Horn of Africa, think of Somalia, and think about how this can actually sustain that landscape. These unique socio-ecological landscapes that bring together culture, history, people, animals, wildlife. It's just amazing. We see this is an old statistic back in 2016, but 225,000 people in Somalia get most of their income from frankincense harvesting. It just gives you a little insight that these are big numbers of people we're talking about. Finally is gum arabic, which is actually a huge product. It's used in so many foods and as an emulsifier and all sorts of things, digestive health. A very difficult supply chain. Largely comes from places like Sudan, which is not it's a vulnerable supply chain, but it's a huge and increasing demand in the food and beverage, pharmaceutical and cosmetic area. Market valued at 900 million in 2025, and we're thinking it's going to be at 1.5 billion by 2035. Again, its role in combating desertification and sustaining landscape, and and really, really poor places, poor countries, that it can make an enormous difference to. So here we are. What are we seeing? What are the threads we're pulling out from those things I mentioned? Well, the one thing is, I hope what has been clear just from those few vignettes is the enormous range of opportunities. Firstly, for sustaining those species. Secondly, the large scale of those positive landscape impacts. A lot of the products that we just spoke about are not like farmed densely like wheat or something. It's spread out across the landscape, meaning you can get a significant landscape impact through that sustainable harvesting and tremendous level of increased resilience. Also, enormous socio-economic gains. We're talking millions of people over the continent, marginalized communities, poor communities that can be uplifted, that can have dignified, real livelihoods. But all I can say is there are risks. Now, our job is to certify these products, and we do see issues. Huge issues with human rights risks, child labor, forced labor, other kinds of abuses, not paying people properly, all sorts of things like that. There are, of course, risks of overharvesting as well. And finally, we see very fragile supply chains. Trying to get that gum arabic out of Sudan is no joke. So, huge opportunities, but the risks are there. So how do we see forward? What is the power of these wild plants? What is the possibility to build Africa's wild plant economy? We see our little role as FairWild is simply to help address those risks, to make sure we're doing things properly by providing the certification. And how do you really do this best? Through positive, powerful partnerships. In this world, we have to work together to solve the problems. And all I want to say is, well, this is a wonderful segue over to Jaco, because our partnership with AAK has been one of the most impactful things that I've ever seen in my career. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Barr, for that comprehensive overview of the different plants within the wildlife economy. And more importantly, the way you framed the vision that connects people, nature, and business, and how important it is for these three domains to remain balanced. Mr. Nybro, we now look forward to hearing from you and learning more about how these dynamics unfold within AAK Kolo Nafaso program. Over to you, sir.
I'm going to take you through a bit about shea and specifically our Kolo Nafaso sourcing program. Just for some context, we're looking at shea. As Deborah mentioned, it's grown in a belt that stretches across the middle of Africa. It is a landscape crop. We don't see any farming, traditional farming or plantations. It is traditionally collected by the women who has used this for generations in their traditional daily lives, either as a cooking oil or using the shea butter for personal care as a skin cream, especially used for their smaller children to protect against the sun and the dryness. Today, we estimate that around 25% of the available volume is still used locally, and then 75% is commercially available. That is then split into some what we call artisanal processing, the shea butter, handcrafted shea butters that you can find on the shelves also in a shop near you. And then around 90% is going into actual industrial processing, where it goes into predominantly confectionery. That is the biggest segment, driving 90% of the volume demand globally. And then secondly, to personal care, which is around 10-15% of the total demand. As I said, it's growing in the landscape, part of agroforestry systems, and in the bush, sort of wild setting. And it is traditionally the women collecting. It is collecting, not picking. So they collect the why is that not moving? Sorry. They collect the fruits from the ground, and it is a large volume across this belt. It is estimated that around 900,000 metric tons are collected. There can be annual variances, the crop yield changes, and therefore supporting literally millions of women across the shea belt. It also means that it's important to realize that not everything is being collected, which is good in terms of making sure that there is enough left on the ground to secure this natural regeneration, and we see new shea trees. When the women have collected, the first step they do is they go back to the village and they heat the kernels, the fruits or the kernels, to avoid them from germinating. If they start germinating, that affects the volume of oil available and the quality of it. Then they go through a drying and a shelling process, and then either use it locally and produce their own shea butter or handcrafted shea butter for commercial purposes, or they sell the kernels to people like us. In that setting, we have been active for many years, and traditionally we have sourced through two, let's say, supply chains. When I say traditional, the conventional way is doing it by buying from traders and middlemen and aggregators. There are a lot of people active in that space. And then we have now since 2009, we started our own direct sourcing program in Kolo Nafaso in Burkina Faso. And in 2015, we started it up in Ghana. That's the one I'm going to talk more about here. There we are a direct sourcing program, so there are no middlemen. There's only AAK employees working with the women collectors who are then organized in groups for very practical purposes. And we have some very basic but also strong principles that guides the program. I'm going to highlight the direct trade. I already mentioned that. It has been very important for us in order to keep the traceability and keep that transparency promise also to our customers, that we work directly with the women without any intermediaries, no formal structures or middlemen in there. Another one that I highlight always is the freedom to do business. we don't want to lock the women in to let's say, a volume obligation that they have to live up to. There's no contract in that sense from their side. The contract or the commitment comes from our side, where we commit to buy whatever they want to sell, but they are completely free to decide if they want to sell to us. That keeps us on our toes. We have to make sure that we are the best offering, the best potential customer for the women, and I think it is an important aspect to keep in mind when we're dealing with a population that are potentially, less powerful in the balance with larger companies such as ours. On the right, we have some what we call the enablers. We make sure that there is a transparent financial infrastructure, typically bank accounts, but increasingly also more mobile money solutions so that we can pay the women. And we do pre-financing, and that is the single most impactful part of what we do, because we pay out, we call it pre-financing, but in reality, it's an advance payment for part of the volume that the women decide to indicate that they will sell to us. And we pay it out at the time of the year where they have little or no other sources of income. And I'll come back to that a little bit. But of course, when we're on the ground, that also enables all the other things that we can do, and all of the ways that we can approach the risks that we see, both from our perspective in our value chain, but of course also from the women. So the training element is super important. We're of course focusing on the shea and the shea quality. We are helping the women with more efficient ways of processing in the village, but we're also addressing other health and safety aspects. We're also addressing human rights and especially child labor to minimize the risk and raise awareness also on village level. We provide the logistics. The women don't have to walk to a market. We come to the villages. We have a large fleet of our own trucks that roam around in the northern part of Ghana to collect all the volumes that the women decide to sell to us. And we have a bonus system in place that adds to group cohesion and of course also as a very tangible monetary motivator. Over the years, this program has grown to what we believe is the largest sourcing program of its kind. Last season, that ended, on the 31st of December last year, we worked with more than 230,000 women in Ghana. As you can see, it has grown over the years with a small dip around the COVID days, but the ambition is to continue to grow as much as we can. And I just want to visualize the scale. When we talk about 230,000 women, it can be difficult to see. But when you look at this map, then each of these blue dots is a village. This is the map of northern Ghana, the Ghanaian part of the shea belt. And we were working in more than 3,000 communities last season. We have a very wide geographical spread. And that, of course, has some challenges in terms of logistics. We need to make sure that we are there when the women are ready. So that is a continuous challenge, which we are, of course, having to improve on to make sure that we also provide that service level to the women that we promised them. And we are FairWild certified as of last year, as Deborah mentioned. It has been a very, very interesting, very, very fruitful and learningful experience going through the certification process. But the certification is driven by commercial requirements. We have customers, especially in the personal care industry, that places more and more emphasis on a third-party certification. That is why we decided to go with the certification. But then the important part for us, of course, is to say, how can we then utilize this partnership with FairWild to further improve and to further develop what we're doing on the ground, so that we not just have commercial benefits in terms of happy customers, but also utilize this in our daily work in the field. This is all because of business, and Deborah mentioned it in her presentation. We are not here if nobody wants to buy the shea products that we produce. We are producing ingredients to a large scale of confectionery and food and personal care brands. So you won't find an AAK oil on the shelves in the supermarket, but every time you take a bite of a Mars bar or take some Nutella spread on your toast, you will find shea products, and some of them are from AAK in what you eat, or a lip balm or a skin cream, hair product. You will find shea products, shea as part of the ingredients there. So without the business, we can't do anything, and we have to make sure that we link things. But for the women, it's also a business. It's a let's say we call it a secondary source of income. They're first and foremost, let's say, traditional farmers, but it is an important source of income. And I mentioned pre-finance, and because of the scale of Kolo Nafaso, we are actually at a point where we are literally paying out millions of euros during some lean month of the year. That flows directly into the village economies, and that has an effect on the women's ability to support their families and their own livelihoods. Fair market pricing with the living wage floor is part of the certification, also with FairWild. And we are first and foremost driven by the commercial aspects and commercial price levels. There is a supply and demand that determines that, but there is a living wage floor that we have committed to. And if the market drops, we will compensate through community impact programs. This is a long-term commitment, and not just because we want to have a long-term view on our business, but also because the women, they have to be able to trust that we come back. When they start their collection, they have to trust that there will be a buyer at the other end, so they don't risk wasting their time collecting something that they can't sell. That provides certainty and a sense of security for these women and their families. And then we have this bonus system that builds the group cohesion. The groups decide what they want to spend their bonus money on. And what we see time and time again is that the women decide to spend it on something that benefits the whole community. It can be a school renovation. It can be a renovation of a borehole, a water pump, or things along those lines. But the presence on the ground also gives us the opportunity to do more than just buy the shea kernels. One of the focus areas is to address the risk of the use of firewood and the felling of various trees for the use of firewood has for the landscape, and of course also the workload for the women. And one of the ways to do that is these improved cook stoves that we have by now facilitated the women building more than 65,000 of them. They are used not just for shea, but they're making this is a big one that they would use for processing of shea, but they also build smaller ones that they then use for their daily household purposes. Significant reduction in firewood consumption, which is what is driving this. And then for the women, especially for their children, there's no open flames to stumble on and risk burning themselves. We need to make sure that we also have a business 10, 20, 30, 50 years from now. And one of the ways to do that is, of course, to secure that there are more trees, that we're doing our best to compensate for the trees that are disappearing. It is a risk. And we have planted an awful lot of trees, and we're continuing to do that. But we also see a much greater need to have a more holistic view on the landscape, because in many areas across the shea belt, we are actually in a situation where there are, in some areas, literally only shea trees left. And that has, of course, devastating consequences on the general biodiversity, the pollinators, the birds, the insects, and therefore also on soil quality. That affects not just the yield on the shea trees, it also affects the yields on the regular farming activities, the food crops. And that is a concern looking ahead that we are going to focus on as not just as a company, but also the whole industry. We are working a lot with VSLAs, these village saving and loan associations, which are, let's say, microcredit institutions that are owned and controlled by the women in the village. It provides access to finance, which is otherwise very, very difficult for these women to gain access to. Usually, if you go to a bank, you will have to, come with some sort of collateral, but also the interest rates that they can reasonably achieve are very, very high. this is a way to build some more financial resilience locally. And it helps women not just for, let's say, emergency needs, the medical care, but also a lot of them, we see that increasingly are using it to kickstart other income generating activities based on the money that they can loan from these VSLAs. For me personally, this is one of the most impactful social interventions that we have and that I have seen in my years in West Africa. And then we trying to pilot we call it dual purpose sheller. It's a shelling machine that will help the women with the very tedious process of shelling the nuts. And it's also an example on, rather than just donate thousands of these shellers, then we want to make it a dual purpose, so that it can enable an income generating service. We have started out doing it, of course, for shea, and then we can change an insert in this sheller, and then they can use it for groundnuts, which is a very common crop in this area. And therefore it becomes a sellable service, which can provide income for the women or for their sons and daughters. We're piloting this now for the second year. We're scaling it up, and so far it looks good. It looks like enough income can be generated to support the running maintenance, and I have high hopes for this. So those are some of the interventions that we are going through. I want to finish up by saying that we are just one actor. We have a network of customers, and we see that we can engage our customers in a very meaningful way by adding some of these intervention programs that provide additional value locally through our Kolo Nafaso program. It directly connects the volume that the customers buy from us with the impact it generates, not just the commercial impact, but also adding these other initiatives. And of course, it supports the long-term business. It brings them closer to us. It is not typically multi-year programs that we run with these customers. So it gives us also a higher expectations that we'll also be able to sell volume to these customers in the years to come, supporting what we do and supporting the livelihood of the women. And then I also want to highlight again our partnership with FairWild, which is, from my perspective, much more than just a piece of paper and certificate. I see this as a building block for these continuous livelihood and landscape improvements. FairWild comes with experience. They also come with requirements, and that helps us to keep us sharp and to continue develop moving into the coming years. And that was what I had to share with you for now.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Jacob.
Thank you.
I think what's particularly powerful about today's conversation is how we've firstly moved from the broader framing of sustainability and certification to being given a concrete example of how you're operating at a significant scale. And I found the details of the stages that are taken up until the final product quite interesting as well. And most importantly, how value addition is being done locally, because many times you see that it's done elsewhere, and that leads to little to none livelihood improvement for the communities that are involved. I have two questions for each one of you. The first one goes to Ms. Deborah. What systems, whether certification, traceability, or partnership models, are most effective in ensuring sustainability and fairness?
I would argue that all of those things are absolutely essential. It's really, but at the end of the day, it's all about partnership. It's about seeing everybody in that supply chain as a partner. The collector is a partner, the person organizing the collectors is a partner, the buyer is a partner, we are a partner, all the way down to the consumer is a partner. And we promote these things and achieve these things by all working together. Which is why it was so nice to have Jacob here today, because that is partnership in practice. And
I
it
agree.
shows how they partner all the way down, partner with us, and everybody partners with everybody. So I'd say that's probably the key.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. And then to you, Mr. Jacob, what makes a partnership, speaking of partnership, what makes a partnership between a large company and local harvesters genuinely work in practice?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think I'll start with trust. That's for me key, and has been key to develop Kolo Nafaso to the scale that we have today. Without that trust, we would not have been able to do that. The women would have walked away and said, we don't want to work with you. So without that, we have nothing. Maintaining that trust and building on that trust is the foundation for the whole program. And it might sound a bit of a platitude, but what we say is what we do has been a mantra that has guided us throughout. That also means that we have been very careful about being too ambitious. We don't want to overpromise, because that can risk leading to lack of, you're breaking that trust because you won't be able to live up to what you say. So we have been, some would say, rather conservative in what we do. And then we are commercially driven. So at the end of the day, somebody's got to pay our salaries and pay the price to the women. So those two things, making sure that you're trustworthy, and then realize that we are part of an ecosystem that requires customers at the end of the day. Make sure to connect those dots.
Great. So it all comes down to connecting dots. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Moving on to the questions from our audience. The first question is, would this program, I presume they're speaking of the program that you're currently holding, Mr. Jacob, will this program be extended to Kakuma to support the refugee women we are serving? I'm hearing good programs that are of great impact and can genuinely transform lives of people here. They also shared their email.
All right. We want to expand Kolo Nafaso, and I can't promise that we'll come to Kakuma, but again, based on the commercial demand that is increasing, we're expanding. When we expand, we have to. There are three things that needs to be in place. One is, of course, that there are shea trees available in an area to sufficient scale. Secondly, that there are people available to collect and to form this commercial relationship with. And the third one, which is increasingly, unfortunately, a headache, is the safety and security situation. I mentioned that we have started the program in Burkina Faso, but because of deteriorating security situation, we have been unable to continue in Burkina Faso because it requires that we have our own people on the ground. And we need to make sure that our staff stay safe along the way. So those are the three, let's say, primary criteria we're looking at. So we will expand. I can't say exactly where and when yet, but we will.
Got it. Thank you for sharing. Now, a question for you, Ms. Deborah. How is the market assured that the product is FairWild certified vis-a-vis a product that is not FairWild certified?
Right, okay, this is a complex thing depending where you are and who you are in the market. So just to get one step back, what our certification is based on is a standard with a set of requirements, and then it goes down to specific a checklist of set of questions to be asked. Now, our standard is very specifically what is called a third-party standard, which means we provide the standard, we support clients in preparing for certification and preparing for an audit, but fundamentally, the audit, the check, that absolute guarantee is done by a third party. And this is critically important because otherwise we would just be checking our own homework, so to speak, or the organization on the ground would just be sorting themselves out. So there are three really important players here. There's the collector organization on the ground, there's FairWild providing the standard, providing the guidance, providing the support, and crucially, there's what's called the certification body, the third-party auditor that comes in and checks and verifies. And when everything is correct, they issue the FairWild certificate. So anybody can go and look that up and get that, of course. Now, how does the market know this? In some cases, of course, it goes all the way through to the consumer, and there's an on-pack labeling. So if any of you drink Pukka tea or something like that, you will see a FairWild logo on the packet. But that is not always the case. You will never see, for example, Chanel perfume or a Creed perfume with FairWild on the perfume industry simply doesn't do that. But what is most important is that the market, the next step in that line, here's the collector organization, here's the trader, here's the manufacturer, that they commit themselves and are part of the FairWild family all the way along. So each one is the market of the one before, if so to speak. And that's where the trail of FairWild responsibility leads all the way through from the harvester to the consumer.
This one is for you, Mr. Jacob. It says, tell us a bit more about the energy side of things, the woody biomass required to heat treat the product. Any innovation in alternative energy to try minimize the possibility of unintended deforestation as a result of increased shear demand?
We say that the demand for the firewood is first and foremost driven by daily household needs. So we have to move beyond the shear. The shear obviously requires firewood because that's the traditional source of energy in the villages. But shear is a seasonal activity, and you boil during that period. But you use firewood every day for your household needs for food preparation. So doing something on shear is what we try to do with these cook stoves, reduce the need for this firewood. But if you want to really look at impact, then we have to look at how are people in the villages doing their daily household needs. So we need to move beyond the supply chain, which is very often the case when you address risks, because we are part of a landscape. Whatever happens in that landscape is affecting us. I don't have a good answer, to be perfectly honest. What we need to do is to make sure that the landscape can support the need for the firewood, and that hence back to what I was mentioning before, that we need to make sure that there is the biodiversity, the natural regeneration supported by initiatives, that we have fast growing species that are good for fuel wood, make sure that they're regenerated. Because I think it will be a long time before we have natural gas pipelines running into the villages. And we have to be realistic. So the short-term or medium-term solution is to secure the biodiversity, secure that there is other species available that are more suitable and can regenerate themselves fast enough to support the need.
There was a question about training, for example, and what sort of training and how frequently and how does it happen and so on. And this is really interesting because we often start off by actually looking at what was the traditional practice. A lot of traditional cultural practice embodies sustainable practices. So the trick is really, when you look, because each species is different, the trick is to go and look and say, how was this done sustainably, traditionally, and build upon that to provide effective training. Now, training is very different for different species, for example, because if you are picking up shea, it's one thing. If you are taking a resin out of a boswellia tree, there's how often should you do it? When should you do it? When should there be a rest period for the tree? And all of that when you're dealing with resins. Then you get things like pelargonium down in South Africa, where you're taking the whole plant out of the ground kind of thing. So it has to be quite specific. So training has to be based on traditional cultural practice, understanding what the community does already, building from that, enhancing sustainability, and renewed on a regular basis. And why I wanted to just pick on that is to go further to the question from Hanan Al-Hadi about Sudan and whether there is a sort of a transition period. Well, no, there isn't necessarily. It depends what's already happening. There is a process because we're certifying a natural process, a natural harvesting process that is very often sustainable in itself. So there's not really a transition period like you would see in organic. But there may be things that need to be done, looking at how is payment happening, is there enough training, what does there need to do. So it's very difficult to talk about what is a typical time frame because it depends where we're starting from. Is where we're starting from pretty much in line, in which case it can be 3-4 months, or do we need to work with the client for some time to help them get to the point where we can say, now we think you're ready, can we help you get to the next level?
Thank you for sharing that. Now, just to maybe move us a little bit away from certification and share as a product, I would like maybe to address the elephant in the room, climate change. I have a question around climate change, which states that, and it could be answered by any one of you. How is climate variability affecting harvesting systems, and how does that resilience look like in the current landscapes that you're working in?
Some of the more arid systems are actually curiously already quite resilient. So adapting around them, like the boswellia, like the baobab, etc., is actually relatively doable. We are seeing in some parts of the world an increasing aridity where yields are declining, where other species are coming up. So some places you are seeing a shift in what can be harvested, a shift in how it can be harvested. But these are relatively slow shifts at the moment. Nature in itself is more adaptable than farming is, if you know what I mean. And that's probably, it's something we just keep working with and adapt as we go.
Yeah, I think I'll second that, if I may, that the shea tree is very resilient, but it's not everything in the surrounding landscape that is as resilient. And that can, and we are probably already seeing it, lead to a contributing factor to the depletion of the biodiversity. But as Deborah said, it's a slow moving process if we look at climate change in isolation. But the effects can be accelerated by the human intervention that we see, clearing of the landscape for agricultural purposes, land use change, and these things. So the tree itself, I have good faith that it will survive even larger changes. We also have seen some studies supporting that. But the rest of the landscape may suffer larger consequences, and that in turn could have negative effects on this year.
Got it. I have another question from the chat, which could actually be a build-up for you, Mr. Jacob, as a follow-up, with regards to the vegetation, the trees that you're using. The question is, what strategies are being implemented to enhance natural regeneration and successful establishment of juvenile plants?
Yeah, very practically, when we say that we plant trees, then we actually don't plant trees. The women plant the trees, so it's part of the relationship with the women. Because if you don't monitor a seedling and if you don't help it along, then you risk that it will not survive. So that human intervention is important, and that comes locally. That comes from the village level. So replanting is one, but also as part of that, is saying for every tree we replant, we should protect, two naturally occurring seedlings. That is an intervention that very often require that we go beyond the women and start talking to the men, because ultimately, traditionally, they are the ones controlling the land. We need to make sure that they are on board, not to clear that piece of land for farming, agricultural purposes and stuff like that. So it widens the scope of stakeholders and the number of people that you need to include. But it just emphasizes that we are not in isolation. We need all actors to play along if we want to succeed with these things. There is a lot of research going on grafted species and varieties. We see quite good results starting to emerge, faster growing, faster producing, that can help that. But we are still to see it at scale. But I do see some promising signs in helping the trees along to develop faster. That also helps. They are less fragile if they are faster growing.
If you could leave the audience with one key takeaway, what is the single most important question someone should ask about a product linked to wildlife harvested ingredients?
I think it's about taking that step back and saying, in every product we use, what is in that product? for us as consumers to be discerning, to say, what is in that product? What possibility is there for a wild harvested product? And be discerning. Deal with companies you know that you can check out.
Thank you. Mr. Jacob, over to you.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I agree with Deborah. I think that everything is driven by demand, and we as consumers have the ultimate power, but therefore also the ultimate responsibility. I think it's our task as a producer, as a company, and our customers as brands, and people like FairWild and similar organizations, that we have a responsibility to inform and educate, make sure that it is actually possible to understand where the ingredients are coming from when you select a product on the shelf in the supermarket, which is a challenge. And I know that personally. You look at that ingredient list, there's very little transparency, and that is ultimately the biggest challenge. But we as consumers are the most powerful force in this whole ecosystem, and we need to use that.
Well, there you have it. We as consumers are the powerful force. Thank you so much to you, Mr. Jacob and Miss Deborah, for the insightful discussion we've had today, and to Share Screen for hosting us, and to everyone who joined us today. I'd like to wish you guys a meaningful World Wildlife Day and a continued commitment to conserving health, heritage, and livelihoods through sustainable wild plant economies. Thank you and have a wonderful evening.